But yeah, I think they're same, but different, and are poised to win this division.
You're now listening to the Boys in the Booth podcast with your hosts, Harper Cody, Chad Melbourne, and Casey Abrams.
That's a big one.
Yeah!
Good evening and welcome to episode 183 of the podcast. Cody Abrams and Melbourne with you for this one, and this is the last of our division preseason rankings. We're going to be talking about the Atlantic Division, of course, to wrap things up in this episode. So looking forward to that. And of course, we were all together this past weekend in Toronto. That was a great time, and it's great to be chatting with you guys this evening. How we doing?
Yeah, great time in the Big Smoke with you guys this weekend. Although my front nine was certainly lacking, I pulled it together in the back nine. I'm still feeling it. I don't think I've had a good sleep since Thursday. I've just been in that state of I know I need to catch up, so I can't fall asleep, and it's just a snowball effect from there. So I might be a little delirious this episode, and maybe I can rile up some more ridiculous comments.
Telltale sign that we're getting old is that, Case, you and I are both still feeling it today, the effects of not sleeping and having a few beverages over the weekend, and it's Tuesday. Like, this is this is the telltale sign that the boys are getting old. But what a weekend it was. I was the opposite of you, Case. My front nine was decent, my back nine not so much, but it was a great time, and boys, we are inching closer and closer to regular season hockey. The preseason has started. We watched a game at mine, of course, a couple of them, and Harper missed that beautiful goal by Logan Cooley. He fell asleep for that one, but what an incredible goal. I'm so excited for this season. I was just telling Harper before we started here that I'm going to a game on Monday, the first preseason game that I have been to in a while, so I'm looking forward to that. The Leafs are playing Montreal, so yeah, we're just inching closer to the regular season, and I couldn't be more excited.
Yeah, absolutely. Great time with you guys, and I'm definitely feeling the sleep deprivation, the effects from that for sure. Even though it's Tuesday, and we got back from Toronto on Sunday, and saw this meme on Facebook the other day that I think completely fits with us, and it's like, I miss the age when I didn't have to wake up and I didn't make sound effects when I woke up, and I feel like that applies to us. So anyway, but it was a great time, and certainly looking forward to getting some rest here as the week goes on. But anyway, before we get into the Atlantic Division here, which is always a fun one for us to wrap up our preseason rankings for all four NHL divisions. Chad, you've got another little game for us, so let's get to that.
Yes, a little mini game, and we still don't have a name for this segment, but this is what we do every week. We play a bit of a different mini game just to have some fun and loosen up before we get into the meat and potatoes of the episode. So this week, it's King of the Hill, okay? What I'm going to do is name a player and then a second player, and you tell me which is better. The winner of that, the player that you think is better, will stay. I'll introduce another player into the mix, and you tell me who you think is better. I'm going to start with Casey, then I'm going to go to Harper, okay? And then back to Casey, back to Harper. I have 6 players. How does that sound, guys? Following along with the rules here?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, so King of the Hill, first player, going to Casey, Jason Robertson, okay, or Kirill Kaprizov.
I'm going to go with Jason Robertson. I think he's got, he has that youth. I think it's already a discussion between these two, and the fact that he's just going to get better with his age. I'm going to go with Jason Robertson. I think he's going to have a phenomenal year this year.
That's a good pick, and I actually think in the newest EA NHL rankings, Jason Robertson was ranked ahead of Kirill Kaprizov. So there you go. Following EA, they got something right.
So I feel like what I just said is wrong.
Yeah, might have to flip it. Okay, Harper. Jason Robertson or Jack Hughes?
Oh, geez, that's a good one. I'm going to go with Jack Hughes because I feel like he, like, with his team and the position that, you know, being that premier position down the middle and everything, I just feel like he is so much more important to his team and is more at the center of attention when it comes to the role with his team, with Casey's New Jersey Devils. I feel like, you know, Robertson is obviously one of the stars on the Dallas Stars, but, you know, can be overshadowed at times by guys like Roope Hintz and Miro Heiskanen, of course. So I will go with Jack Hughes.
I think that's a good answer. I purposefully made all 6 of these players relatively close in terms of where I value them, at least. So I wanted to make it difficult on you guys, make some difficult decisions. Okay, going to Casey again. Jack Hughes now, who is the king of the hill, or Mitch Marner?
Oh man, that's pretty tough. They're pretty similar last year in stats, obviously, both 99 points. I think Jack is going to continue to get better and will definitely be the better player at the end of the day. And right now, it's very close, so I got to go with something that, you know, makes the difference. I'm going to say that Jack Hughes is a gamer, and I think Jack Hughes is the better player for that reason.
Okay, I was interested to hear the argument. I think I would also probably go with Jack Hughes, but I was interested to hear that. That's a good pick. Okay, so staying on the top is Jack Hughes. Going to Harper, Jack Hughes or David Pastrnak?
Well, I mean, Pastrnak had a huge year last year. Of course, he was going into a contract year. He ended up getting that big extension with the Boston Bruins, and oh man. See, if Pasta was a center, that would really do it for me, because centers are so important, but goal scorers are also important. And I feel like Pasta could very well go out and get 60 goals again. But you know what? I'll stick with Jack Hughes and that premier position. And again, just, you know, he is so important for them as that number one franchise center in New Jersey, and whereas, you know, in Boston you've got Charlie McAvoy, you've got Brad Marchand, and who knows? I mean, what Pasta is going to be able to do this coming season with them depleted a little bit depth wise. So I'll stick with Hughes, man.
Both on my fantasy team, so that makes me feel good.
There you go. Yeah, Harp, good argument. Definitely no other weapons in New Jersey. So that's an ironclad argument there. Okay, Casey, last one here. And speaking of premier number one centers in the league, Jack Hughes or Nathan MacKinnon?
Nathan MacKinnon.
Okay.
I can't wait for the day, or I hope the day comes that I can say Jack Hughes is better than Nathan MacKinnon, but it's not today.
Yeah, fair enough.
No.
I had to give you a difficult one at the end, but that wraps it up, boys. That's King of the Hill. This is one of the games that I think I've enjoyed the most, to be honest, because it forces you to think about why you think a player is better than another one. So that's that. King of the Hill, boys.
Yeah, that was great. One guy who I thought was going to be featured in that was Elias Pettersson, and that would have made things really interesting.
Very true.
With him heading into a contract year, but anyway, that was great. So let's get into this episode, boys. And this is always a fun one for us. We've always wrapped up our preseason division rankings with this division, and of course, that is the Atlantic. And starting at the number one spot, Case, what do you got? Let's get right into it here.
What's up, guys? Thanks for making it this far into the podcast. We hope you're enjoying the show so far. I just want to let you know that we're still doing a limited time merch drop over on boysinthebooth.com/shop. We're selling t-shirts, long sleeves, hoodies, crew necks, sweat shorts, slides, you name it, we're selling it at boysinthebooth.com, so head over there and check it out when you can. Every single purchase allows us to improve the quality of our podcasts going forward. Plus, you get to wear some awesome gear too and support the boys, so we'd really appreciate it. Thanks, guys. This podcast is sponsored by Liquid IV. Whether you're staying active or nursing a hangover, Liquid IV has you covered. Just one stick of Liquid IV in 16 ounces of water hydrates faster and more efficiently than water alone. There's plenty of awesome flavors, but my personal favorite is lemon lime. Get 20% off when you go to liquidiv.com and use the code boys_in_the_booth at checkout. That's 20% off anything in the store when you order using the promo code boys_in_the_booth. Experience better hydration today with Liquid IV. This podcast is sponsored by the best ticket app out there, SeatGeek. SeatGeek takes the confusion out of buying tickets, making it quick and easy to get the best deals on tickets to your favorite sporting events. Plus, Boys in the Booth listeners get $20 off their first ticket purchase on SeatGeek with the promo code Boys in the Booth in all caps. So click the link down below to download the app and remember to get your discounted tickets using the code Boys in the Booth in all caps. Get great seats for a fraction of the cost with SeatGeek.
Yeah, it's funny. You might be able to put like the subheader of this episode as I could be convinced, because you could convince me on every position in this division except for maybe 1 and 8. And number 1, I do have Chad's Toronto Maple Leafs winning this division, and I think easily. I think that this team is even better than they were last year. When I look at the offense of this team, there's not much I need to say. Obviously, they have the stars on this team. If Matthews can have a bounce back year on what is still a great season last year, that's obviously going to help this team. Marner is still going to be gunning for that 100-point mark. Willie Nylander's looking for a contract, so he's going to be flying out there. Tavares is still going to have 40 goals all on the power play. So obviously they have the stardom here, but this team got even deeper when it comes to scoring. I think that all the guys they lost in the offseason, they've improved with who they brought in. They brought in Bertuzzi and Domi, who I think are both improvements on a Kerfoot and a Bunting. So I think this team's got the depth scoring and obviously the stardom. So goals isn't going to be the problem. And on the back end, I've really grown to love this top pair of Morgan Rielly and TJ Brody. I think TJ Brody is a better defensive defenseman than I have given credit in the past. I was kind of hard on him when he first came to Toronto, but I've really grown to like him. And then the depth of this team has gotten even stronger on defense. McCabe and the addition of Klingberg, who is an upgrade on Hull, obviously. And the pair of Giordano and Timothy Liljegren was one of the best at times last season. So defense, they've got it all. And then goaltending, Samsonov, he showed us that he is a true starting goalie last year. And then Woll stepped up when they really needed him, both in the backup role in the regular season as well as in the playoffs. So goaltending is not the question mark it was last year for me. I don't really have any questions about this team. They've got the grit now, so you can shut up all those grit-loving Leafs fans if it doesn't work this season. New GM, they have nothing to complain about. So let's see who's going to be the fall guy this year if they aren't good. But I think this team's going to win this division.
Yeah, someone's uncle, and many of our uncles actually are pumped that the Maple Leafs got some grit in their lineup, so they can stop harping on Kyle Dubas as the GM. They've got Brad Treliving, who loves grit, sandpaper, snot, piss, and vinegar, and that's his quote directly. So he'll tell you how it is, and he did. But yeah, Case, I also have the Maple Leafs at number 1. Surprise, surprise. We picked them to finish first in this division last year. They got 111 points. Usually that would be enough to win a division, but the Boston Bruins had 135. So I don't think any of us are anticipating 135 points out of the Bruins this year again. So I think we can safely say that Toronto, it's their division to lose. For all the reasons you mentioned, I think this year they're probably going to score more, but they might get scored on a little bit more as well. And I dug into a few numbers on that topic because I truly believe that now that's how they're structured to play, which I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's just different. Last season, they were 8th in expected goals for and 9th in expected goals against in the entire league in all situations. This year, if I were to predict where they'll finish in both of those categories, I would say top 5 in expected goals for and maybe between 10th and 15th in expected goals against. So I think they got a little bit better offensively and a little bit worse defensively. But I think that at the end of the day, they probably shake out to finish in and around 110 points, and they had 111 last year. So that's my prediction. They're basically the same team they're a little bit different on the periphery. I like how they added some guys who can play and bring a different element, like Bertuzzi and Domi. I like how this season they're going to be able to have some younger players on cheap contracts for the full season, hopefully, like Matthew Nyes, like Nick Robertson, who had a great preseason last year, and hopefully he has a similar preseason this year. But yeah, I think they're same, but different, and are poised to win this division. Harper, what do you think?
Well, great regular season team. I mean, you look at the last 5 years, and they've been one of the best regular season teams in the NHL through and through. So there's no question about that. Obviously, the questions are going to come up with this team when we get to the playoffs next year. But no, I mean, looking at these guys coming in, I like what Tree Living has done in his first off season, adding all those great terms that we've heard being tossed around this off season. You've got Bertuzzi in a contract year. Max Domi, I think he could come out like a house on fire. It obviously means a lot to him, clearly, to come to Toronto and be a Maple Leaf. And John Klingberg, that he's motivated to have a bounce back year after just a disastrous year last year, starting out with Anaheim and then going to Minnesota at the deadline and all the question marks around him. William Nylander, with him being in a contract year, like Case mentioned, and then all the other depth pieces that are already there that have been brought in by Kyle Dubas. But you knew that there needed to be a shakeup with this team. It started at the top, and I think that their general manager, that Brad Treliving, is extremely motivated for this team to be a success after what he went through in Calgary, and so I like what he's done. And you mentioned, a few guys that are coming in and they're on, some cheap contracts. Matthew Nyes, who really showed something in the playoffs. Joseph Woll, same thing. And just looking at this team future-wise a little bit, Easton Cowan, you might have something with him as well, who, Chad, you and I were talking a little bit about today and in our DMs, and is going to stick with the NHL roster for the time being. So, I mean, that's a little bit down the road probably, but there are some intriguing pieces there. And you mentioned Nick Robertson, and can he bounce back and stay healthy? But no, for the most part, this team is the same. They're excellent in the regular season. That's not going to change, and I have them at number 1 in this division.
Yeah, I think it just makes sense. After this, though, after number 1, I'm very much with Casey. I could be convinced between 2 and 7. Like, truly, I'm not sold on any of these teams making the playoffs or missing the playoffs. It is truly going to be a bloodbath in the Atlantic, and I think that's why this division over the last few years has been so exciting to watch, because we knew this time was going to come where some teams are dropping back a little bit and some teams are getting better, and finally they were going to meet somewhere in the middle. And I think this is the season where we're going to see all out total war in this division. So let's get into that then.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get to this number 2 spot. Case, who you got?
Yeah, again, here's where I can be convinced, but after being hard on their offseason, I still have the Tampa Bay Lightning coming second in this division. It's a team that I'm very scared to speak ill of, because they're just so consistently good the last 5 years or more. And I don't know, when I look at this team, I just see the stardom, and it's enough to push this team over the top of many teams in this division. And, maybe they took a hit to the depth of this team, but they still have Stamkos and Point and Kucherov, Hedman and Sergachev and Vasilevsky. Like, that stardom is enough to put this team in second in this division, in my opinion. When you look at the back end, it was negligible change, and Hedman's still the star on this team, but Sergachev definitely showed that he can be that guy in the years to come. Maybe as time catches up with Hedman, he's still not that old. So I'm saying, 3 or 4 years down the road. And sure, Chernak may be a guy that we'll say is overpaid, but he is great defensively and hard to play against and just rounds out the top 4 of this team so well. And then in that, Vasilevsky, he may have shown a little bit of weakness for the first time in his career in the playoffs last year, but he was still Mr. Consistency in the regular season. He had a great stat line for 60 games last year, and he's enough to keep them near the top of the division once again. So I still believe in this team despite, a hit to the depth, losing guys like Killorn and Colton and Perry, Maroon, Bellemare. But, stardom, man. This team's good.
Yeah, so I obviously had a difficult time with this division, and I landed on another team finishing in the number 2 spot, and I had Tampa Bay in the number 4 spot, actually, because I really think there's going to be a lot of change in this division, and I didn't just want to run back the same standings as last year aside from 1 or 2 outliers. So I went a bit off the board with a different team at number 2, but I'll speak to Tampa Bay right now and the reason that I had them at the number 4 spot, still making the playoffs, mind you, and that would mean in my division they would likely play the Maple Leafs again in the first round, 1 versus 4, depending on which wildcard spot they get. But I have Tampa Bay in that 4 spot just because I think up front, losing a bit of depth isn't the biggest problem. Losing a player like Corey Perry or Pat Maroon, while they're energy guys and important players to that team, I don't think their product on the ice is necessarily that good in the first place. I think they bring intangibles that are important, but in terms of actually scoring goals and making plays, I didn't think that they were that good in the first place. I think the problem for this team, and I've been saying this over the last couple seasons, is the back end. You have your Hedman, you have your Sergachev, and you have your Chernak. But then after that, the drop-off to me is significant. You've got Perbix, Bogo, Hayden Fleury, Radish, and DeHaan, and all of those guys are fine. All 5 of those players are fine. But when you just think about the fact that 3 of those players are going to have to be in the lineup every single night, I think that back end just doesn't look scary at all. And then what happens if one of those top 3 guys gets injured? Then you have 4 of those 5, call them maybe bottom pairing defensemen in your lineup at all times. I think at the deadline, they'll probably address this and get better. But just in terms of getting out to a hot start, I just don't know if I see it because this team already gives up a ton on the defensive side. Last year, they were in the bottom half of the league in terms of expected goals against, and Vasilevsky was good, but not great. So I just don't know if I see Tampa Bay being able to replicate the seasons that they've had in the past without a blue line that looks as good as it once did. So that was my main concern with Tampa Bay.
I don't know. I disagree only because of Perbix. He is a Samuelson on Buffalo. He's Jan Ruda of the past in Tampa Bay, where he just works with their top defenseman, and sometimes that's all you need. You need the guy that just works with your star. And really, anyone could work with Victor Hedman at times, but Perbix is fit like a glove on that pairing last year, just as a Samuelson fits with Dahlin. So I don't know. I think that the top 4 has no problem at all. It's a very strong top 4. I can see the arguments about the bottom pair, but I think they've got enough rotation there that if one guy starts to slip, it's next man up. And I'm not too worried about the back end of this team, especially if they can still score like they used to.
Well, and maybe that's the case, right? Maybe they have so many guys who are pushing for those bottom 2 or 3 spots where, it creates that good internal competition and guys are playing out of their minds to keep their spot. Maybe that's the case. Also, though, something we didn't mention, what about the games when Vasilevsky isn't in net? I know that Brian Elliott wasn't incredible over the last couple of years or Curtis McElhinney before that, but this year, going into the season right now, they have Jonas Johansson as their backup goalie, and I don't know if I trust him at all. So I just...
My counter to that is Vasilevsky's the only goalie we've said on this podcast is trusted to be consistent. He played 60 games last year, was 8th or 9th in goals save above expected, had a 919 save percentage and a moderately high goals against average for himself, but he was still consistent in the regular season. And I think he, with Johansson as his backup, he's still going to play close to 70 games and be, Vasilevsky.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, listen, Vasilevsky is one of the only goalies in the league who we've always said we feel confident in paying. We feel confident in starting 60-plus games. I just wonder about those 20 to 25 games. Probably not 25. I wonder about the 15 to 20 games that Johansson gets. I just have no trust in the guy. I don't know him at all. I know that he was called the worst goalie to play in the NHL by a reporter a couple years ago. I think that's a bit harsh, but
Wow.
But just I don't know. I don't like the back end. It's not as formidable as it once was. That's why I had them at 4. But like I said, I could be convinced either way. It's not like I have ironclad arguments for the number 2 and 3 spot. I just feel like when I look at Tampa Bay, and it did kind of show in the playoffs against the Maple Leafs as well, as soon as one defenseman went out, that blue line just was in shambles. You had, Sergachev having to play 28 minutes a night and Chernak doing the same thing. And I don't know, they're still very good. And I think Sergachev actually might be more impactful on this blue line than even Hedman now, because Sergachev is just so dynamic and has taken such a leap over the last couple years. But I just think 3 to 6 isn't very scary.
What about Hugo Anelfelt when you're looking at net? Do you think that he can...
Maybe he's a guy. He's a guy with little NHL experience, if any. I'm not sure if he's played any games, but I know he's a prospect and he's up and coming. So maybe. I don't know.
I mean, it's better than the worst goalie to ever play in the NHL.
Yeah.
What a ridiculous comment.
I know. I need to look up who said that quote, because it was everyone got on that reporter and just said that was a terrible thing to say. I think that was when he was in Colorado. But anyway, Harper, what are your thoughts on this whole debate here?
Well, I side with Case on this one for the most part. I've got Tampa in the number 2 spot. The biggest thing for me is, number 1, not only is the fact that there's still so much star power on this team, that those core guys are still there, even though they've lost a bit of the depth, like Case mentioned. Even though, adding a guy like Connor Sherry in your bottom 6 is a nice add. But look, this is the first time in the last 3 years that this team has been able to have a full off season of rest, and I don't think that we can discount that at all. That really encourages me with this team that this is the first time in the last 3 years that they've got a full off season of rest, and that could be very scary. The fact that they're energized and coming in fresh and everything, But there are some question marks, certainly. The back end doesn't concern me as much. What concerns me is what is the relationship with their captain, Steven Stamkos, going to be like moving forward? Is this going to be a distraction or cause a bit of a rift in the organization? I would like to think that it wouldn't, and that something would get figured out sooner rather than later, just with the kind of guy that Stamkos is off the ice and the kind of player that he is. But again, just looking at the on-ice product of this team, full off season of rest for the first time in a long time, and those core guys still being there, and one of the best goaltenders on the planet, if not the best goaltender on the planet, has me very encouraged to pick Tampa Bay in the second spot in this division.
Fair enough. And I want to be clear too, me putting Tampa Bay at 4 is not me saying that I think the team is bad. I just think there's bound to be some change in this division, and some other teams have either gotten much better or also kind of just figured it out. So that's why I had Tampa at 4.
I initially had a different team at number 2 and made a change. So I hear your argument, but I still think that Tampa's number 2.
Okay, so we'll go with that. Who do you have at 3 then, Case? I wonder if we agree on this.
Number 3, keeping it in the same state, the Florida Panthers. I mean, we saw what they did in the playoffs. Obviously, they weren't the regular season team of last year or 2 years ago. They were. But when I look at this team, despite being a last-second playoff ad and then going to the finals, this team outscored the likes of Dallas, Tampa, Toronto, Colorado, LA, to name a few. And I think that the replacement of Duclair by Rodriguez and the continued growth of some of their younger guys like Luostarinen and Lundell and Denisenko, I think that they're going to be right up there again in terms of scoring, especially if Matthew Tkachuk can continue to have a monster year like last year. And then those kind of role-playing star players, whatever category they fit in, of Verhaeghe and Reinhart, like there's a lot of goals to be scored on this team. And when I look at the back end, I think they've done an admirable job at filling the holes that injuries have caused in the back end. A lot of ads on the back end, and Kulikov and Mikkola and Mike Riley and OEL, who had 3 apples in the preseason game last night. They did a great job trying to plug the holes, but their 2 best defensemen are going to be missed until mid-December, and that's potentially 30 plus games. Their 30 game mark is December 16th. 30 games without the likes of Ekblad and Montour is going to significantly hurt this team at the beginning of the year, and that's why I knocked them down 1 spot. The only thing that stopped me from knocking them down 2 spots is the resiliency that they showed in the playoffs last year. And just knowing that that's within this team, they're obviously going to find ways to win enough games to get the 3rd spot in this division early on in this season.
Wow, I did not know that those 2 injuries were until mid-December. That
news came out recently, and that's why I've waited so long to put my keepers in, because I have Montour, and it would be like a 16th round pick for me to keep him.
Wait, so are you keeping Montour in the 16th round?
No. 15th round, but no, I'm not.
Really? Even though, I mean, like in fantasy, it's kind of, you only need him for the playoffs. Seriously? You're not? Whatever. Yeah.
I've got other guys to keep. Man.
All right, that's fine. I'll pick him in the 13th round then, Case. I'll beat you to it.
Yeah, I'll pick him in the 12th.
Oh no. Speaking of, I have a fantasy draft tonight for my other league I'm really excited for, and then our draft on Sunday. Oh, I can't wait to get into fantasy hockey. But yeah, talking about Florida, that is the team I had in the number 2 spot. I didn't know that injury news, so that would have been important for me to look up before doing my rankings. I think I would have maybe bumped them down, and that would have changed my entire rankings. But when I look at this team up front, like you mentioned, they replaced Duclair with Erod, and they're deep. Like this team up front is the same but different slightly, and that's going to be all right. Think back to the start of last season when Matt Tkachuk was just coming in. They were still trying to work on how to figure that whole system out with Matt Tkachuk as the go-to guy. And as the season went on, they eventually did figure it out. The main problem was that they didn't have goaltending like all year. You can talk about, and we have, about how their defense hasn't been very good in the past, especially without those 2 big name players. But goaltending was a big problem for them last season. So I don't expect it to be as bad this year. On the back end, you're losing Gudas, but you replace him with more offense in OEL. And I think that will be the best thing for OEL's career, being put into position, especially for those first few months of the season, where he feels like he's important again. And he's playing big minutes again. And I think that'll be great for his confidence and for his production too, being a go-to guy. And speaking of fantasy, that might be a player. I don't know who's going to quarterback their power play, but for the first couple months, that might be a guy who does it. So could be important for the first couple months of fantasy. And then on the back end, I alluded to it. Bobrovsky, all of a sudden, towards the end of the year, became the $10 million player that he is. I don't know if I'm banking on that throughout the entire season again, but we weren't banking on Alex Lyon coming in and winning like 20 straight games to get them into the playoffs either. So this year they have Spencer Knight back full time after spending some time in the NHL's player assistance program.
I hope he comes back stronger. Really
and I think that tandem now will be even better than any goaltending they had at the end of last season, because it'll be a true tandem of two very capable guys. So I'm looking forward to that. That's why I had Florida at 2. That's, I guess, where I will keep them. But if I knew that injury stuff at the start, I might have moved them down. But number 2 sounds about, or number 3 rather, sounds about right, behind Tampa Bay.
Yeah, I think that solidifies our rankings. I think you're going to say the same thing. So.
Absolutely. No, that's exactly it. I had the Panthers at number 3, and that's the best spot for them. I think this is a huge year for Spencer Knight, but confident in him, and his talents, and being a young guy still, and just coming back fresh, and having that motivation to get going again and prove that he is the real deal after being a first round pick a few years back. And Sergei Bobrovsky, I think that he'll be motivated to continue what was some unbelievable play from him in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And again, like Case, you said it's a resilient group, and it's next man up. You've got a healthy Matthew Tkachuk coming in, who, again, I think is going to come out like a house on fire, and has established himself as one of the elite players in this league, and can go out and get 100 points every year. I wouldn't be surprised if that is what Matthew Tkachuk is moving forward. And so you may look at this team and think that, there's not a lot of depth here or whatever, but that they are a resilient group, and they can certainly score a lot of goals. Maturation from guys like Lundell and Luostarinen, who got an extension in the summer. A change of scenery for OEL, which I think is going to be huge for him. You guys know that I've been a big advocate for a guy like Gustav Forsling. I don't think that he gives enough credit. Mikkola is a monster as well, so you lose a guy like Gudas, but Mikkola certainly is aggressive back there, and you're going to miss Montour and Ekblad certainly, but who knows if Montour is going to be able to have a 73-point season again. He's a fantastic defenseman, but who knows if he's able to have a year like that again. And what you're missing in Ekblad, and certainly that's too bad, but I just think that this team is going to just carry over that momentum and that resiliency and that work ethic from what was an incredible run to the Stanley Cup Finals this past year, and I've got them at number 3 in this division.
Now here's where it gets incredibly tricky, and no matter who you pick for the number 4, 5, and 6 spot, someone's going to be upset. So let's get into that.
That's right.
I put 3 names in a hat and pulled one out.
All right. Well, I know who I have in the number 4 spot, but Case, take it away.
Well, buddy, I think we're going to agree on who we have in the 4 spot, because I did pick the Buffalo Sabres at number 4 in this division, taking a big step. They just missed out on the playoffs last year, but this team scored a ton of goals last year. And the only real change to the offseason is that they're a year older. All these players are going to be that much better this year, and it's going to be fun to watch. Harper, get ready for lots of goals. Defense was where they struggled last year. We already know that this team has a great top 3, but it was the rest that hurt. But they've done a good job going out and grabbing some guys, and Clifton and Eric Johnson, who, he's not the first overall pick that he should be, but he's still a good depth guy to have in that locker room as well. And goaltending, I'm not personally quite convinced on a Levi UPL tandem, but there's a ton of guys out there that are so extremely high on Devin Levi. And with the story he's had so far in his career, I'd love to be convinced this season. Keep that theme going of convincing Casey. Especially with this team's team defense and goaltending struggles of last year. They couldn't keep the puck out of the net. Despite being third in the whole season of goals, they were a -4 goal differential. So they've got to figure out the team defense. I think they had some good ads on the back end, and maybe Devin Levi can be the guy to really push these guys over the top and get them in the playoffs this year.
Yeah, I also have Buffalo in that spot. So here we go. It's surprising that we disagreed early, but now we might just, wrap it off here and name some teams that we agree on. But Buffalo, for me, it was very simple. They missed the playoffs by a point last year. They got older, like Casey mentioned, and I don't think it's possible to have goaltending as bad next year. I know that they had a similar tandem. They had UPL playing, they had Comrie playing, but they also had Craig Anderson, who I think was the best of the three. But now those two goalies are a year older. I'm thinking mostly of UPL, who is still considered a prospect in my mind, and bringing in Devin Levi. I just don't see them being in the bottom third of goals saved above expected, which they were last year collectively amongst all the guys who played. On the back end, I kind of like how they have the top four set up, how it is similar to a Tampa case, like you were mentioning, how they have a stud and an anchor, a stud and an anchor. And of course, the two studs are Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power. So I like that structure. That being said, I don't think the defense is very good outside of those two anchors, if I'm being completely honest. I think, like Ottawa's is probably better. Florida's arguably, but it's
better than last year.
It's better than last year, and they missed by 1 point.
Yeah.
So all of that being said, that's why I have them making the playoffs in that number 4 spot. That's where we are, right? We had Toronto, Tampa, Florida, and then Buffalo in the number 4 spot.
Well, surprise, surprise. I'm going to agree with you guys, and I've got the Sabres in the number 4 spot, and not a whole lot more I can really say. Just the growth and the step forward that this team took last season, I think it surprised a lot of people. I certainly didn't expect them to be 1 point out of a playoff spot, but that's what they did. And so a couple of things that are going to be, keys to success for this team. Number one, getting off to a good start and maintaining it, not taking that dump that they do every year in November.
Every year.
And exactly, they get off to a great start, and then November hits, 8-game losing streak. Well, guess what? That's what happened last year. And then they had another 8-game losing streak. And so if it weren't for those 16 games that they lost right there, those 2 8-game losing streaks, and then an incredible run in the final stretch of the season to make it close and try and have that last-ditch effort to try to get in. If it weren't for those 2 losing streaks, maybe they would have gotten into the playoffs, no problem. And so that's number one. And then number 2, it's better play on the defensive side of the puck, obviously. And so, adding guys like Clifton and Johnson, they're not world beaters, but I think they're good guys that have been added in to stabilize things. And, Chad, I totally get some of your concerns with the back end, but I think a player like Matthias Samuelsson doesn't get enough credit as well. When he is out of the lineup, and when he was injured and out of the lineup last year, you could really get a sense that blue line was out of sorts. And, you talk about Dahlin and Power, another year older, Power coming off a 35-point season. I think that point total is going to continue to go up. Dahlin will be right in the Norris conversation, no doubt about that. And then we know that this team can score goals. Even with Jack Quinn out of the lineup for a significant amount of time to start the season, I mean, pick a guy to insert into that top 6. Victor Olofsson, say what you want about him, bit of a perimeter player, power play, trigger man, but the guy had 28 goals last year. Yuri Kulik lit it up in Rochester last year. Does Jordan Greenway get a look in the top 6? And so pick a guy to put in there. But, it's another year where everybody's older. I think that Devin Levi, just his demeanor, the way that he plays the game, he's so calm, and what he's achieved already in his young career as a 7th-round draft pick, it's only going to get better. So just the culture, the growth, the way that they've built things, they're doing it the right way. Finally, you see the path for this team. And, Case, I look at my Sabres, and they're very similar to your Devils, I think, in my mind. The Devils last year took that step forward. They got into the playoffs. They won a round, Stanley Cup contender. I see a very similar path for the Sabres, where this year, at least we're hoping, make the playoffs, take that step, maybe win a round or two or get close to it. Then the next year or the year after, Stanley Cup contender. So that's what I see for this team moving forward. Extremely proud of the direction that they're going in. Definitely have them in this 4th spot. Glad you guys do as well.
It's funny that you mentioned the New Jersey Devils of last year, because that's exactly what Craig Button said on TSN about the Ottawa Senators of this year. He said he thought they could be the New Jersey Devils of last year. Meaning
Craig
a
Button
team,
said that?
Craig Button said that. Which
Maybe I should move Ottawa down then. Never mind.
I don't often agree with things that Craig Button says, because usually he just yells at me, and I don't like being yelled at, and that's just his demeanor. But this was, I think, a good take, and I think Buffalo is another close comparison too. And honestly, Detroit could even be that team. A team, I mean, personally, I don't think they're going to be very good, but at the same time, no one thought that New Jersey was going to be very good last season, and they just dominated the Metro Division. So I think there are some structural similarities between all of those teams I just mentioned. So it'll be interesting to see which team in this Atlantic Division is the New Jersey of the Metro last year.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it really, between Buffalo, Ottawa, and Detroit, I don't see either. I think we're all in agreement here. We don't see either one of those teams coming out and having 50 wins and finishing near the top of the division. I mean, who knows? It could be a surprise, and it could happen. Don't see that. But just in terms of the step forward and the build and the direction, yeah, absolutely. It could be any one of these 3 teams, but that's where it gets tricky, because they're all kind of right there, those 3, trying to break up that quartet of teams that have dominated this division for so long. So let's get to that number 5 spot, Case.
Wow. I can't wait to be proven wrong by the Boston Bruins and also get dumped on by all their fans, especially the SoundCloud rappers of Boston. We're going to get absolutely ripped apart by them. But yeah, I'm actually agreeing with Craig Button, and I have the Ottawa Senators in the 5 spot. I think this team is really coming together, and I think we're going to see a large increase of goals this season with, Timmy Stu, Brady, Batherson, Pinto all taking another step, plus hopefully a healthy Josh Norris. That would be huge for this team. And the added depth scoring of Tarasenko and Kubalik. Haven't even mentioned Claude Giroux yet. And really Grieg, not sure, who has looked really good at times at the small amount of time he got last year, and then including this preseason so far at camp. He was the most noticeable player on the ice for Ottawa at all times for me when I watched the game against the Devils. So I'm really excited to see what he can do. And then they've got some good depth players up front. And the back end is going to continue to get better. They've got Chychrun here for full season, and Shabbat. Obviously, that pair is going to be lethal, and they're going to play a ton of minutes. 2 guys that have always played a ton of minutes in their career. And then they've got Sanderson and Zub. And then an okay bottom pairing of Hamonic, and whoever gets on there with him, Brandstrom hopefully is going to be the guy. We're really waiting on him to take that final big step. So I really like what I see, both offense and defense of this team. And then the goaltending is kind of where the question marks come up. I think we can all agree that maybe Korpisalo is overpaid, but he had a good season last year, and Forsberg is a solid backup. So I'm interested to see what this tandem can do this year, but I think that is where the question mark on this team is. And also if this team can stay healthy, they've just struggled over the last 2 seasons with injuries. And I think that's what's really held them back from taking a big step. And I think that this could be the year for them. And I wouldn't be shocked if they got into the 4th spot.
Yeah. So my original rankings, I had Ottawa in the 5 spot. That was having, like I mentioned, Tampa Bay at number 4. But yeah, I wouldn't be shocked either if Ottawa squeaks into the playoffs. It's just crazy how we've said how much better they got this offseason, but we're still putting them at number 5 in this division.
Yeah, it's the division, man.
Which is like probably not good enough to make the playoffs, because there are some good teams in the Metro as well, and there's only 2 wildcard spots. And if I were to guess, this is how it happened last year, that it's going to be 4 teams from each division in the playoffs. That's usually just sort of how it shakes out, because even though your team's pretty good, you play against your own division the most. And if you lose those games, then you're not in a great position to, squeak into a wild card spot. So I also have Ottawa in that number 5 spot, maybe missing the playoffs, maybe making, but I'm not willing to put money on 5 teams from the Atlantic making the playoffs this year. But I just think it comes down to the depth up front. Of course you lost to Brinkett, but getting Kubalik in return, Shane Pinto eventually when he's signed, that'll be a nice little boost for them. Tarasenko to replace some of the goals lost in DeBrincat. I think it's a good forward group, and they're very deep. A healthy Norris as well is another massive thing. It's a good forward group. I think they're very deep. They are lacking a bit of star power outside of Brady Tkachuk and Timmy Stützle, who, by the way, Tim Stützle had the quietest 90-point season last year. Just wanted to say.
Talking about quiet seasons, I think you're really slacking on the Giroux talk here, because he was a star last season.
Okay, that's true. And the thing is, I forgot for a split second that they had him, which just goes to show how deep this team is. Their top 6 forward group is really good. And then on the back end, too, I think their defense is maybe top 3 in this division. I don't think that's crazy to say. I don't love their bottom pair, but in terms of the guys that they have in their top 4, it's really good. And I fully expect Jake Sanderson, after signing that massive ticket, to take a bit of a step forward this year. So that'll be good for them. And between the pipes, I see it as a tandem. I've never seen Korpisalo as a starter. I think he's a tandem goalie. I don't know if he's 1A or 1B. I think they expect him to be 1A given the money that they gave him. But I think Forsberg is just as good. His problem has been health. So that's going to be, it might be a good tandem, I want to say, going forward. I don't want to ever say it's going to be, because it's hard to predict goalies. So Ottawa, I have comfortably in the number 5 spot. I know Boston fans don't want to hear that. Detroit fans don't want to hear that. Maybe even Montreal fans don't want to hear that if they're a little ahead of themselves in their own rebuild. But that's where I have the Senators. Harper, how about you?
Case, you want to jump back in there for a sec?
There's just one thing I wanted to touch on. I could have waited until you went, Harper, but 3 quarterbacks on this team.
Yeah.
That's one thing you cannot undervalue, is there's 3 power play quarterbacks in Chabot, Chychrun, and Sanderson. So it's who's going to get that job? Are they? I'm assuming they're going to go 2D on one of the power plays, but who's going to be the guy on each of these power plays?
That's a fantasy question, because I'm not touching any of those guys in fantasy, even though they're all good. I need a quarterback. I don't need a third of a quarterback. I need a quarterback. Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? So
yeah, exactly. Well, and I think eventually Sanderson is going to be the number 1 defenseman on this team and be the number 1 quarterback on the first power play unit. Chychrun's got a bomb from back there, and Chabot had a little bit of a down year, but is still a great defenseman who plays a ton of minutes for this team. So talking about the Senators, I've got them in the number 5 spot as well. I think it's going to be tough to see a path where it ends up being 5 teams from the Atlantic and 3 from the Metro that end up being the 8 that gets into the playoffs out of the East. But it could happen. Like this team this division in a couple of years, I think, has a chance to be one of, if not the best division in hockey. And so the Senators definitely are exciting. They were close in their pursuit of a playoff spot down the stretch. I think they finished 5 or 6 points out. Getting Chychrun at the deadline was a huge boost. Obviously, health is always a concern with him, but when he's playing and when he's healthy, he is a really underrated defenseman back there. So really like the look of the back end, some open competition for that bottom pair, and don't be surprised if Tyler Kleven ends up on that bottom pair to start the season. I know they're very high on him, and he did not look out of place when he came in and played a chunk of games late in the year. Goaltending. Korpisalo had a nice year last year. Certainly that's a big commitment, and big dollars for him. There's always risk with that, but he is a solid goaltender, I think. Forsberg, obviously brutal year for him last year. Looking forward to seeing him back healthy. But don't count out Mads Søgaard either. I think that he really showed something last year. He's had a couple of good preseason games, a good one the other night against the Maple Leafs, and so I wouldn't count him out as well. And as we saw with the Vegas Golden Knights, you need more than one goaltender, so there's that as well. And then up front, I mean, it's another year where guys like Stützle and Tkachuk and Pinto eventually, once he gets signed, a healthy Josh Norris, all these guys are a year older and they're all locked up for a long time. And then you've got guys like Ridley Gregg coming in, even some depth guys like that Matthew Highmore looked good the other night in a preseason game as well. So, they've been able to find some depth to add in and everything. Obviously, we're going to be going to some Senators games this year, all of us, and so very excited to see what this team is going to be able to do. But again, you see the path. This group is young. They're locked up for a long time, and they could certainly squeak into a wild card spot here, but I've got them comfortably in that 5th spot. But the Senators are exciting, no question. And I forgot to say this off the top, but a good start for the Senators is absolutely crucial because they're notorious for getting off to bad starts in October, November, and then that sinks their season, and then they're playing catch-up from there. So they have to get off to a good start, or it could be DJ Smith's job.
That's true. I just want to say now, as we move on to number 6, and I'm going to pick the Boston Bruins. I assume both of you have Boston at number 6 as well. We picked them to finish 5th in the division last year, and they had the best regular season ever recorded in the history of the NHL.
That's why I said I can't wait to be proven wrong, because somehow they're going to do it. We had them, 5th last year? Is that what you said?
5th, yeah.
We had them 5th last year, and they looked a lot better than they did going into this season, so we'll see. But
yeah, so Case, why don't you get into it then? I'll send it to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone knows what's going on with this team. Like, losing Bergeron, although it's inevitable due to retirement, and plus Krejci, like that hurts. And now this team is lacking the depth at center. I'll be the first to admit that Zacha looked great last year. Like, really good. And I'm happy for him because I like him as a person, so it's good to see. I just don't think he's a 1C in this league. Not yet, at least. So the center core is certainly lacking. I know that a guy like Taylor Hall was overshadowed a lot last year. They're going to miss him. They're going to miss Bertuzzi. And, it's just a lot of guys out the door this season. The D-core is still a major strength on this team. Talk about, one of the best in this division. I still think that these guys are here. You know how much I love Charlie McAvoy, and the depth is phenomenal here. Not much else I need to say there. Like, sure, they lost Orlov, but they didn't have him that long last year, and they've replaced him with a guy like Kevin Shattenkirk, so it's really filled out fine on the back end. And then goaltending, like, it's arguably the best in the whole league, the tandem at least. So it's interesting. We'll see if this team is going to be able to defense their way into the playoffs. And that's really what they're going to have to do unless someone comes out of nowhere and has a phenomenal season. And I think I hope for my fantasy season that Pastrnak can continue to score at will. Marchand is still there, of course, but they're missing a lot of guys heading into this season.
They certainly are. And I want to be careful when I make comparisons here because, like we mentioned, there are some rappers out there who don't love our takes on comparisons. But I compare this team, the Boston Bruins, to, now how they're currently constructed, to the New York Islanders of the Metro Division. They're a team built now from the back end out with an incredible goaltending tandem, an incredible defense, at least top four, and then one or two studs up front, and they lack a bit of depth, but can still kind of beat you up with some of the players they have up front. So I think that comparison is true, and we'll see how it works for both teams this year. But I just don't think they're going to be able to score any goals, and that's sort of where the comparison comes from in the first place. So if Pastrnak is able to drive a line with him and Marchand and get 60 goals again, and then they're able to get some surprise depth scoring, they might be all right and they might make the playoffs. But I just don't see how they're even remotely close to being the team they were last season, missing those three big players up front. And then, of course, Hathaway and Orlov, who admittedly they didn't have for very long, but they're still going to be missing them.
I think they need to split Pastrnak and Marchand up because they need both of those guys driving a line with the supporting cast here. There's good support in Zacha and DeBrusk and Charlie Coyle, but I think that Pastrnak and Marchand need to be split up to drive lines.
And that was the thinking when Taylor Hall came in, right? They could put Pastrnak with Hall, and that could be a really good second line. I forget who was playing down the middle between those two, but point was they had the depth to do that. I'm not sure they do anymore, because think back to when they didn't have Hall and they just played Bergeron, Marchand, and Pastrnak on the first line, and it was the best line in hockey for 4 years in a row. So I don't know, you can be a good team with one good line and then just play defense on the other three. So it'll be interesting how that shakes out. But one thing I wanted to say about Boston is that the fact that they got 135 points last year, we know that's not going to happen again. To make the playoffs, it would probably have to be around the 95 point mark or so. That's 20 wins on the table. And that's if they only regress to 95. That's 20 wins on the table, 40 points to be collected mostly by teams in this division. And that was actually a point brought up on the Steve Dangle podcast a couple weeks ago. Mm-hmm. So the question is going to be, who can steal those points in this division? Is it going to be Buffalo or Ottawa or Detroit or Montreal or Toronto or Tampa? So it'll be really interesting. But I just thought that was crazy to mention. 20 whole wins, and this team could potentially still make the playoffs. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, it's always dangerous, as we've learned in past years, to be hard on the Bruins, because what do people always say about this team? They always find a way to figure things out. But when you look at this team on paper, it's a lot of the things that you guys said. First of all, it's the lack of depth down the middle and not having a first line center. Pavel Zacha had a huge breakout year last year and has fit in very well with this team, but he's not a first line center, and so that obviously sticks out. And there will be some guys that'll get a good opportunity. I think that Morgan Geekie will be a good player for this team, but again, he's more of a third line center, and is one of those guys that needs to elevate his game and get a better opportunity. There are still a lot of great core pieces on this team. The Pasternaks, the Marchands, McAvoy, and Lindholm. Lindholm last year, guys, as we know, was in the Norris Trophy conversation early on. He was that good for this team. And the goaltending, Allmark, he's not going to have the insane season that he did last year. At least we don't expect him to. And you've got a young Jeremy Swayman behind him. That's a pretty great tandem. But it's the depth, obviously, like you guys mentioned, and particularly with the forward group and that bottom six. And I'm really curious to see which young players are going to step up and start to contribute for this team in the bottom six in particular. The Laukos, the McLaughlins, the Fabian Lysels. Do we finally see a player like that? AJ Greer is another guy to mention in there as well. So, some of those questions are the ones that I have with the Boston Bruins. We have them in the 6th spot. But again, it feels a little dangerous because it's Boston. It's like Pittsburgh in the Metro, right? Like, you're hard on a team like that, but it feels like they always find a way to figure things out. But it's just, when you look at the improvements of teams like Buffalo and Ottawa, it's hard not to be a little harder on this team after such an insane season last year and what they've lost. And so Boston in the 6th spot.
Yep.
All right, let's get to 7 and 8, and then we'll wrap this thing up and put a bow on it. Let's go to the 7 spot, Case.
Yeah, first, before I start talking about these two teams, I want to say that I don't think there's a bad team in this division.
Agreed.
Simply said.
No lottery teams, I don't think.
No,
I don't think there's a bad team here. I think the next two teams just fall, victim to this division. And I do have Detroit next because I think they're another team that could be a shocker and just absolutely surprise us this year. They really needed to address the goal scoring this year, and they did that. They did exactly that in bringing in DeBrincat. And I think it was Dylan Larkin has only played with one player that's had more than 60 points in his career, and that was Bertuzzi. So having some support on his wing is going to be huge. And I mean, they brought in a lot of guys, including JT Compher, who had a breakout season last year, and I became a big fan of. And there's a lot of guys that they added in the past. I think why a lot of pundits and including us are so sheepish on this team is they have shuffled the deck in the last 2 years. They brought in a ton of players 2 off seasons ago and a ton of players this off season. So it's tough to get a gauge of what team this is going to be. The back end is a little concerning for me. Probably the real concern here. I've grown to have a lot of respect for Jake Wallman. I think he has become one of those premier defensive defensemen in the league. So putting him with Moritz is a fantastic pair that you're going to see a lot of this year because they're going to log a ton of minutes. And then it's kind of a lot of the island of misfit toys, really, on the back end when it comes to Sherratt and Petrie and Hole. I won't count Gostisbehere in there, but maybe you can. So we'll see what type of decor that is in the end. And then goaltending, you have 2 guys that have had some random standout seasons and then lack consistency. So if they can both be the same as they were in those big seasons, then hey, great tandem. But that's what I'm saying is it's just this team is flip a coin for me.
Yeah, and that's the thing for me with Detroit. I don't feel bad putting them in the number 7 spot because I feel like a lot of the players that you mentioned, especially on the back end and in net, that is, I mean, I think they thought Husso was better when they signed him, and I think they thought the team was better when they made some of these signings, but I feel like a lot of these players actually could be good stopgaps because they still have so many young guys over the next couple of years who could potentially crack this lineup and make a difference. Because if I look at this team, that's the one thing that's missing. It's star power. Outside of a Larkin, and a Moritz Seider, you've got your Lucas Raymond, but then after that, I guess you've got your DeBrincat now. But in terms of homegrown star power, that's what they lack. And I feel like they have a plethora of that still upcoming. That's why I don't feel bad about putting Detroit in the number 7 spot. But with all that being said, I don't know what Yzerman is doing anymore. I used to believe in this plan, but this just feels like a random assortment of players. I get adding a guy as a stopgap, waiting for a player to eventually make the team, especially in net with a first-round pick, Sebastian Cossa. But to me, it feels like they almost did too much. There's too much turnover. There's too many new faces. There's a lack of identity here, which I think is never good, especially on a rebuilding team. And it almost feels like they thought they would be good by now, but then panicked a little bit added some other players around the league to contracts that aren't exactly, great contracts and are sort of taking up space for the future, instead of really, focusing on maybe one player or drafting and developing players and just waiting another couple years. It almost feels like 2 rebuilds have happened here. The first one, then they panicked, and now they added a bunch of guys, and now we're starting the second one where they're waiting on the players they drafted last year and the year before. So I don't know. This team is structured really weirdly for me. I think they're going to be good at some point. I just don't think it's going to be this season. But that being said, I could be totally surprised because DeBrincat could come in here, score 50 goals, and drag this team to the playoffs.
Yeah, Chad, I know exactly what you're saying. I totally get what you're saying about the Red Wings. Now, talking about Yzerman for a second, I think that it was really smart of him to recognize that at the deadline last year, where they were kind of in the mix and in the fight for a wild card spot, he decided to sell off because he recognized that, you know what, we're not quite there yet looking at our pieces, and we need to continue to keep drafting and developing. And I think that it was good for them to have 2 first-round picks again and take Danielson and Sandin Pellikka and continue to add to that prospect pool, because the main reason why this Detroit team is behind Buffalo and Ottawa is because their younger players, their high picks, have not taken that step that the younger players and the high picks have taken on the Buffaloes and the Ottawas. And so that is the concern for me. Obviously, you've got Seider and Larkin, but who is going to be their Tim Stützle? Who's going to be their Tage Thompson? Who's going to be that one guy to really take that huge step forward on this team? And that is what separates them from Buffalo and Ottawa. And I agree as well that they've made a lot of signings, they've given out a lot of term to these veterans. There's some risk. Andrew Kopp didn't exactly have a great season last year. JT Compher got a big 5-year deal coming off a career season. Who knows how that's going to go. Justin Hall, don't really understand that deal on the back end. How is Shane Gostisbehere going to fit in? We know he was great in Arizona, but didn't exactly fit in that well in Carolina, and who knows how he's going to fit in Detroit. And so Yzerman has had to add so many of these veteran players because those younger players that they expected to take spots on this roster haven't done so yet. And that is the concern with this team, and that's why I have them behind Buffalo and Ottawa and in the 7th spot.
Well, and Filip Zadina is a perfect example of a player who they thought was going to be able to take a spot, but just wasn't able to. And now he's in San Jose this year, so that'll be... Yeah.
I hope he fills their net, as he would say.
I hope he wins the Calder at 25.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's get to the last team in the 8th spot in this division, and it's the Montreal Canadiens. No question about that. Case, what do you got on the Habs?
Again, not a bad team in this division.
No.
I've been a little confused at times what direction they're trying to go in with some of the moves they made, but they've done a pretty good job at bringing some contracts in and getting some assets in the meantime. And I think that they're starting to kind of take shape of a team where a lot of their young guys are stepping up and getting into that top 6, and that bottom 6 is forming with the veterans. So I do like what's going on in Montreal, despite some of the trades where you're like, what, why? But yeah, no, and a lot of that in the past was that it seemed like they were bringing in the same player, like a middle 6 guy who can score 20 goals, but they've moved on from some of them. And I'm kind of interested to see, what Slafkovsky is going to be this year, because there's a lot of hype around him, obviously, and for good reason. But it's the back end of this team that scares the living bejesus out of me. I don't think that there's a top pair here in any shape, and there's a lot of youth. So there's a lot of guys who are going to have to step up and play some big minutes for them. And I'm a little concerned about that. And then in the back in net, Jake Allen's a very serviceable goaltender, but boy, did Sam Montembeault look rough last night, letting in a goal from half as well as another goal where he was sprawled out on his back and the guy just slid it in from the top of the circle. It was a tough look, but I don't have a ton of faith in the back end or the goaltending, and that's why I have them at 8. There's a lot of guys who can put the puck in and then on this team if they really put their mind to it. So
yeah, it almost feels like Montreal really focused on the rebuild of the forwards, but then on the back end they're doing it a bit differently and waiting for guys to come up like a Lane Hudson. I don't know. It feels like they're at different stages in a rebuild, based on their forwards and defensemen. If that makes any sense. To put it.
No, that makes total sense.
Okay, yeah, and then their goaltending is going to be fine. I don't think either of those guys is a goalie they want to have on their team as the main starter when the team is eventually good. But they're both fine and kind of like Detroit, like they're stopgaps. They're decent goalies, and maybe they're waiting for someone else to come up. Caden Primo, if that's ever the case, I don't know. Maybe someone else, but yeah, Montreal, like they're going to be all right. I almost picked them to finish in the 7th spot, actually ahead of Detroit, just because I thought Detroit's lineup was so odd. But then I thought about it and I looked at the back end on Montreal, and I think they have one true NHL top 4 defenseman, and I think that's Mike Matheson, and we've talked about him in the past, and you know, he quarterbacks the power play, and he's actually a pretty decent defenseman, but other than that, just so many question marks. The one thing I will say is I think they're going to be a team similar to San Jose for different reasons, who's going to be able to score a ton of goals. They're just not going to be able to keep any out of their net. So it'll be a fun year for Montreal. They could surprise people. I don't think they'll be, a 68-point team. That's what they were last year. I could see them even getting like 80 points this year and being, 10 or 15 out of a playoff spot. I think they're a good team, no longer a lottery team. And it's an exciting time to be a Canadiens fan with all of your young players coming into this season healthy and playing together all year. So that'll be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking at the Habs, I mean, they're not there yet when it comes to who they're stacked up against in this division. But like Case said, they're not a bad team. It doesn't mean that they're a bad team. They need to continue to grow, take that next step forward. I think that Kent Hughes and Jeff Gorton have done an excellent job of stacking small victories. You look at Kirby Dach, getting him in there into the program and giving him that opportunity. Alex Newhook, I think, is going to fit in really well there, getting a new opportunity. We'll see what Slavkovsky can do. Cole Caulfield, I think a healthy full season for him could easily be a 40-goal scorer this year. Looking at the back end, to me, it's kind of similar to what they're doing in Anaheim. Like, you look at the Ducks right now on their blue line, there's not a lot there outside of Cam Fowler, but they're waiting on the Zellwegers and Drysdale to take another step, and Minchikov, another guy. And then in Montreal, there's not a lot there outside of Mike Matheson and Caden Gooley, by the way, who I think is very mature for his age and can already play 20-plus minutes a night. But you're waiting on the Hudsons, the Reinbachers, Jordan Harris to take another step, and the list goes on. And then it's a very young and exciting forward group. You look at that Harvey Pinard and the way that he played down the stretch for this team. And so it's another step forward. They're going to get another very good draft pick. I think some of us, and I mean, I might just be wondering this, but I can't be the only one, I don't think. We wonder about them drafting Lane Hudson's younger brother, Cole, in the upcoming draft. I know that's another one of my connection kind of things to bring up. But listen, I mean, this team is going to get another high pick, take a step forward, continue to build things along here, and then next year try to break in and get up there with the Detroits, the Buffaloes, and the Ottawas. That's the path here for Montreal, but they're not there yet. It's another building year, and they're not worried about expectations. They just got to go out there and play under Marty St. Louis. So Montreal in that 8th spot to wrap things up.
Just looking at this division in the short term, the teams that we've talked about here, like over the next 3 years, Toronto's not going to get that much worse. Florida's not going to get that much worse. Tampa Bay is a maybe. Kind of depends what they want to do and if Stamkos stays, so that could be a maybe. Boston is probably getting worse, but that being said, they could go out at the deadline and get, a Mark Scheifele, and then all of a sudden they have a number one center and their forward group looks a bit better. But then Buffalo, Ottawa, Detroit, Montreal, over the next 3 years, they're all getting better, and they're going to be trending towards playoff teams, if not already. So I just think this division is so much fun, and I love talking about it, and this is my favorite episode of the year. So I feel like that might have been something to say as an intro, but I feel like as an outro it works too.
Yeah, absolutely. We're slowly starting to see the turn of the tide here in this division, and it's very exciting. So no, great way to wrap up our preseason division rankings. And unless you guys have anything else to add, I think that wraps it up for episode 183. Thanks so much for listening to this one once again, and for listening to all 4 of our preseason division rankings episodes. Always a pleasure to deliver those to you guys, and hockey is right around the corner. We're a couple of weeks away from the regular season officially getting underway. We can't wait for it. So thanks so much for listening to this one, and we'll talk to you again next week.